Hello, today's lesson is on setting up sheets. Now, as you know, the best way to print or PDF from Revit is not from the working view or even any type of a view from your browser, but by setting up the sheet, making sure all of your views are set up on a correct scale with any annotations, and then printing them or exporting to PDF. So let's look at how to set up a sheet. There are a couple of different ways we can do that. Under View command, you can choose the Sheet option. My preferred way is to just go to your browser and right-click and select a new sheet. Now I already have the title block I want to use, the E1 30 by 42, and E1 is just a industry notation for this particular sheet size. But if you don't have it already loaded, you would just click on Load, which should take you to your Imperial Library. And title blocks are actually not under annotations, but the standard title blocks live under the title blocks category. So as you can see, E1 is 30 by 42. If you're interested, E is 34 by 44. We have been using mostly B, which is our 11 by 17. And some of the other types are here as well. Okay, so let's see what this out of the box title block looks like. You're probably familiar with this. Now, first thing we want to do is customize this. This one obviously advertises Autodesk, and if you've been to my class before, you learned that we don't promote Autodesk or title blocks. If you include any kind of logo, it should be your logo or your client's logo. So to customize the title block, we would click on it and then edit the family. So the first thing we're going to do is just select the image and the Autodesk reference and get rid of this information. Now you can import an image and put, like I said, put your own logo in here. Usually your logo would go on top, and then if you have a client, their logo would go below that because you go first, you have the ownership of the drawings. Another thing we can get rid of here is this revision block. This is used to note all of the different iterations of the drawings, and we usually start tracking this once we submit it for permit and then during construction as well when other people are actively using the drawings. So we will not be using it here. And then I can clean this up. And here you can insert your client's logo, any kind of annotation, any kind of design. You can change the proportion of anything on the sheet. One thing I would suggest not to change is the margin, which is pretty standard, and the width of the title block, which is also very standard, and will leave you with the correct sheet size and proportion that will fit most of the industry standards toward your drawing area. Now, you could make this narrower. I would definitely not make it wider, but the best suggestion is just to leave it the way it is. And look closely at anything else in here that you might need to change. Now, the scale will automatically call up the scale of any of the views you place on a sheet, but you might be placing multiple views, and also you will usually be noting the scale and should be noting the scale in the individual drawing title. So my suggestion is to delete this label, and if we click on this, you can see that it's a label, not just text. So these are all of the different labels that are preset that you can put on your title block. And while we sometimes create custom ones, this usually has enough categories to cover anything we might want to have. So I'm going to get rid of this label, and instead I'm actually going to put the text and pick a more appropriate size. I think 1/4 inch is too large, so 3/16 should fit just right, and write as noted. So this way I will never have a conflict what's in my title block and what's in my drawing title. Again, Revit does track this automatically, but also this is a little trigger for us to put the scale onto the actual drawing. Now if you have 11 by 17, you can use the scale in a tile block. You usually only have one drawing on 11 by 17, but on a larger sheet we will often have multiple drawings. And then look at the other information. Now I appreciate that a lot of times you'll put my name under the checked by, but by the time you give me the drawing I usually won't check it, so we can get rid of that category. And the project number is pretty standard in the industry. If you're working in a firm, each project is going to have a number, and that's how you bill your hours or any kind of reimbursables. But in school, you probably don't have a project number, and your project name already has a location, so we're going to get rid of the project number as well. Now, drawn by is usually noted by your initials, and make sure you fill this in if you leave it, and then the date should be showing up automatically. So as you can see, this is also a label. It's going to draw the information from your computer. If you want to manually override that, you should do that, override the label, and then put the actual text on the sheet. You can actually, the timestamp cannot be overridden, but you can usually override the date in your master file. So this is all I wanted to change. And like I said, from this point on, putting a logo, customizing the tile block in any way. Now I'm going to load this into the project. Now the question is, do I want to save changes? One thing you don't want to do when you're making these modifications, you usually don't want to override whatever is in the Imperial Library. Now I could save it into my project file, or if I just load it into my project, it will automatically live just within the project, which is the only place where I'm using it. If you're customizing something and you think you might use it on multiple projects, then you should save a copy in the project file, or even save an additional copy in the library, but don't override your library templates. And then we want to override any parameters. So now when we're in the sheet view, selecting the tile block, it will prompt us to update the sheet name. So this could be our partition plan sheet. Drawn by is going to prompt your initials. We're not using checked by, so that's fine not to modify. And as you can see, the date here, it's allowing you to override it. This is an actual live timestamp, and you cannot override that. So just keep in mind, whatever you put here for the date, this will not be overridden. And then your client might be Netflix. I think that's Daisy's project. And then you have, and then you're working on a tenant improvement. Now what's going to happen now if I create another sheet and use the same tile block that I've overridden. Now this is the one in the file and not the one from the library. You'll see that all of this information will automatically be updated. Now what's not updated is the drawn by, because you might have multiple people. The number automatically goes to the next available number, and the sheet name you will have to update individually. So this being my second sheet. So now that we have the tile block, let's talk about how to lay out and set up the sheet. Now that we have our tile block set up, let's talk about how to lay out the information on the sheet. What I like to do is, before dragging anything on a sheet, figure out how I'm going to subdivide it, and I use hidden lines in order to do that. So first, you want to offset your border by 1/2 inch. And the reason for that is you don't want to have any annotations within 1/2 inch of the borderline. So whatever kind of annotations you include, you're not going to put them within this denoted area. Let me just make an adjustment here. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to note our block, either vertical or horizontal, for the annotations. And in order to do that, I'll actually subdivide the entire sheet in 4 fields vertically and 5 fields horizontally. So what I'm doing here is going to give me 1, 2, 3, and that's 4 and 5 fields. And then in this direction, I'm going to have 4, so that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And using my equal option, just make sure you're going within the lines that are 1/2 inch of the perimeter. I'm going to create equally spaced fields. Now if I dimension this box, it's going to be 6 3/4 of an inch vertically and 6 3/4 of an inch horizontally. So this is one of the reasons I told you not to mess with the proportion of the tile block, and if you do, you might need to adjust the offset lines, because by keeping it to this dimension and then we just offset 1/2 inch evenly throughout, this is going to give us a very clean dimension for evenly shaped square. And this bottom right hand corner, as you know, is where our legend is going to go. Now if I have the tile block along the bottom, I'm just going to offset this by another 1/2 inch. To allow space for the titles for any of the keynotes, legends, or anything I'm putting along the bottom. If I'm putting them around the top, then I would create a 1/2 inch offset wherever I need to add a title. And then my actual plan view is going to go either horizontally with the notations along the bottom, or more vertically with the notations along the top, or somewhere within this area. I could even potentially have a vertical note block here and have 2 horizontal floor plans if my scale of my project is small enough that I can fit 2 floor plans on one sheet. Now one reason I like to use the hidden lines is because, unlike some of the other ways of subdivide the sheet, you can actually snap on them and tag to them. However, one downside of the hidden lines is they don't automatically transfer from sheet to sheet. So if I look at my other sheet, obviously detail lines are view specific. But if you use a specific line type, you'll be able to quickly filter them and transfer them from sheet to sheet. So I'm going to get rid of my dimensions here, keeping in mind that I don't want to unconstrain anything. And then I'm going to select all the lines, and even if there's something else on the sheet, I can filter and easily make sure that I'm just checking the hidden lines, and then copy, and then I can align this template to current view. Could even potentially align them to multiple sheets at the same time, and this ensures that my layout, the location of the legend, all of the notations, and how I set up my sheet is consistent from one sheet to the next. Now that our basic subdivision of the sheet is done, the next step is looking at the titles of all of the individual views. So first step, let's place an actual floor plan view on the sheet. You do this by just dragging them from the project browser. And as you can see, my particular view will necessitate that my border be on the bottom because the view itself is too big to be placed off to the left hand side, and in order to use the vertical tile. Usually the preference is really to use the vertical tile note block on the right hand side if you can go in either direction if you have small floor plan. However, otherwise it will be dictated by the shape of your floor plan. So now we're going to place it. And by default, there are a few options that your Revit file comes with for the tile. Now, before I get into the details of the tile, there are a few things I do want to point out. Once you decided on your first sheet exactly where you're placing your floor plan, you want to make sure that it's placed in exactly the same location on all of the subsequent sheets. I also like to use hidden lines for that particular purpose. You can use hidden lines to note locations of your grid lines if you have them, or the corner of your floor plan. So usually take a couple of hidden lines, either in the bottom right hand or top right hand corner. And then using those same hidden grid lines, detail lines, I'll snap and I'll take it all the way to the border so I can differentiate them from everything else. And then I'll copy them when I copy my setup and make sure that any view that has a plan view, any sheet that has a plan view, then has this exact same layout. And what this is going to allow me to do is when I place my reflected ceiling plan, I can adjust the location to make sure that the grid lines, these corner grid lines, line up in the exactly same spot. Using the arrows for adjustments and zooming in as much as you need to is a little bit more precise than dragging in Revit, since you will not be able to snap on it. So this way, this view and this view is on exactly the same spot in the sheet. So when I PDF the whole set, when I scroll down through the set, my floor plan will not be bouncing from side to side. Once I place my title, I will do the same with the title. I will put a line along the length of my title line and copy that to the subsequent sheets so I know that I'm putting it in exactly the same location. But next, let's look at how to customize the title. Revit comes with a few presets for the title. If you select your viewport, you will have title with the line, title only, which will eliminate the line, and no title. Now, a lot of times I see either this title or no title, and then if the student wants to customize, they just use text, which is not the best idea. The titles in Revit are cross-referenced, the numbers are cross-referenced, all of this is information that can be scheduled and that can be cross-noted, so it's really a good idea to use the actual live titles. However, there's this perception that we cannot modify them, which is actually not correct. So let's see how the tiles are actually set up. If we scroll down to all of the families, the annotation symbols, all the way towards the bottom, you'll see the view title. And usually there's just view title and a single view title set up. So if we edit this, we will be, and always make sure you save. So if we edit this, we will be able to customize the tile in a variety of ways. First thing, keep in mind your label, you can edit it, and you can change the font type if you choose to. Don't get too creative with a bunch of Comic Sans, but one thing I like to do is to note the size of the label. So this is 1/8 inch, and I usually want to have a larger tile, 1/4 inch, and I might even have 3/32 of an inch, making sure that you change the size to match the name of the label. So now automatically we have two different view types. And this might be too large for all of the views, or you might prefer this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this in the exact same location. So now I have one option for 1/8 inch and one option for 1/4 inch. And obviously I don't want it to look like this on a sheet, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set some view parameters for each one of the options. So if I click on this label, you can see under visible there's the little tab which will allow me to give it a parameter. There is no right now in the family, and I'm going to call this 1/4 inch title. I'll keep it as a type so I can modify it for multiple views, not just as an instance, and group it under visibility. And I'm going to do that same thing with the other view. So this is 1/8 inch tile. And that's going to be my visibility as well. Now what else I might want to control? So scale, I might want scale shown on some of the views, maybe not on the other ones. So again, I'm going to edit the type. 1/8 inch is fine here, and change the visibility. So here, the new visibility is going to be scale. And again, sort it under visibility. And then finally the number. So I might want to turn that off, and if I want it turned off, I will want the bubble turned off. So maybe I'll just want the title, or the title with the line and nothing else. So here I'm selecting multiple elements, and I can still do the visibility parameters. So this is going to be view number. Now before going back, I want to save these as a variety of family types so I can use it in different configurations. So right now everything would be turned on if I loaded it. This is just the default option, the single option for the tile. I'll create a new type. So this is a drawing tile with scale. So in this particular case, I'll have 1/8 inch tile, and I'll have scale and the view number. Then the next one, I'll have drawing tile without scale. And here I'll turn off the scale, and I'll leave everything else the same. Now I also want a tile just for legend, the big tile. So here for legend, I don't want the scale or the view number, I just want the legend at 1/4 inch. And you could do other combinations, so you could have the 1/4 inch tile with the number and the scale, which can be your drawing tile large, and keep creating variations. Okay, so now I'm going to load this into my project. And as usual, I don't want to override the default, but I might want to save it as a personalized version. So for now, for this exercise, I will not be saving it, because it will continue to live within my file. I do want to override the parameter values because it did change the parameters of the previous tile. Okay, so now I can already see there are some changes here. So I'm going to edit type. Okay, so for my tile with line, I want my drawing tile with scale. I'm going to rename this tile with line. Actually, I'm going to call it just to match drawing tile Now, one thing to keep in mind with all of these is that sometimes, like you can see, I have a leftover here. It's hard to purge the different viewport substyles. It's a quirk just specific to Revit, so don't create a whole bunch of extras. Just and if you're changing them, just override them. So here I have drawing title with scale. I want to show the title, so this is going to show with the extension line, which you can turn on and off, and I have a heavier weight. The default is 1 for the extension line. So this is what that's going to look like. So 1/8 inch scale, heavier line. I have the number and everything in here. Okay, let's look at some of the other options. So let's rename this one. So this is going to be my drawing title without scale, in case I have a 3D view or some kind of a view that needs to be cross-referenced but is not a scaled view. This is specifically good if you ever have perspectives or 3Ds, which Revit will sometimes assign the scale to, where in reality they would not have scale. I want to show the title. I do want my extension line, and I want that heavier line weight of 5. Okay, so now, because I turned off the scale on that option within the family, this does not have the scale callout. And let's keep going. Now, no title is just no title and no extension line. So this remains the same, no title. And then finally, title only. So here, my option is the legend title, and I might want to have the extension line on it. So show title and the extension line. And the extension line can be adjusted by dragging the end. So you can use this for a title with the underline. And this is an easy way to adjust your titles. Now keep in mind, once you set up your drawing title, and for most of the scale drawings you will have drawing title with scale. Now decide exactly where you want to place it and how long you want it to be. One thing you want to make sure you do is to use that hidden line on this sheet and I'm using the tab to select it, so I will copy it on my next sheet. So you can see here that the extension of my tile, even though the tile is in approximately the same location and it's the same tile, I will line it up so it's lining up horizontally as well and is equally extended. So again, once a PDF, I want the location of my plan and the location of my tile to be consistent from sheet to sheet. Symbols such as north arrow you can place on one sheet and then line it up in the subsequent views by copying and aligning with the current view. So again, making sure how you're setting up the sheet is consistent from sheet to sheet. Now that we discussed how to set up the title block, lay out the sheet, and adjust the view titles, let's talk about the other components of the sheets. Next thing is going to be our legend, and then we're going to have a legend on pretty much every sheet. It will live in the bottom right hand corner, and as we know now, it's going to be 6 3/4 of an inch, but it's 6 3/4 of an inch. If we have additional information, it might get a little bit bigger than that. Sometimes on things like reflected ceiling plans, where we might be showing multiple types of light fixtures that are then cross-referenced somewhere else, we might have a larger legend, but it's always in the bottom right-hand corner. And the layout of it should, because of that, be the same. So again, as we go from sheet to sheet, it's not moving. How the text and the annotations are rated are not moving. And we've done legends before, so it's not new territory, but let's talk about creating a template to make sure that on this sheet size that legend always remains the same. So I'm going to do this by creating a new annotation symbol. Not a title block, not just a general family, but annotation symbol. Because the characteristic of symbols is they're always the same size no matter what scale you're utilizing. So I want generic annotation, not a tag. Generic tag. Tag is something that you attach to another element always. Annotation is a freestanding element. Okay, and once that opens up, this is the default, so you can read and then get rid of the instructions. And now we want to save this. Since as a first time file it will not have any name, and I'm going to save it as a legend template. Now I want to keep my insertion point in mind, so where your family has a crossing of the reference planes, that's where it's going to be inserting. So if I think about my overall sheet here and the template, I might want to insert it in the bottom right hand corner or along the top here, but probably the bottom right hand corner is one default spot I'll know I'll always be able to find easily. So I'll start my family with that point. And next, I want to make sure that I can turn off these guidelines easily on a separate sublayer or subcategory. So I'm going to go to Manage and Object Styles. Now right now, all of anything I draw is going to be a generic annotation, and everything I draw is going to be turned on or off together. And I don't want that. I want to be able to turn off this portion of the template separately. And I can use it that way in other templates. So I'll create a new subcategory, so I don't have to turn all of the annotations off. I can just turn off this one, and this is going to be hidden lines in generic annotations, and I'm going to give it a green color so it stands out, and the dashed line, which will depend on the scale of the views. It won't always show as dashed. At least I can start it that way. And now I can use the line and make sure I use those hidden lines. So here I'm going to have 6 3/4. Then again 6 3/4. And then I'm going to close it up. And now, as before, I'm going to offset everything by 1/2 inch. So still hidden lines. And along the top I'm going to make a double offset, because in this top portion, remember, you're going to have your title. And then I finally want to think about where I'm going to put my annotations and where I'm going to put the explanations for them. So I'm going to use about 1/3, 2 inches here, to put all of my symbols, which leaves me with plenty of space for any annotations and cross references. And I could even put a line in the middle to let me line them up, and usually this is enough to divide it up. So my title is going to go along the top. I'm going to have a blank perimeter, so I'm not running it too close to the lines and the borders around it. And then I'm going to have my annotations here and the text along this line. And now I can save this and load it into the file. Okay, so right now I'm in a particular working view at a particular scale, so this looks a little bit big. Let's set up a legend. Again, under View, you can select a legend. You can also always go into your project browser under Legends, which we already have some, and right click and create a legend. Now I'm creating a legend for my partition plan. So I want to make sure that it's the same scale, so any annotations are going to be in the same scale. And then now I'm going to insert my symbol, my legend template. So now as I start placing annotations, I know exactly what size this will need to be for when I put it on a sheet. And there are a few different ways of how to create annotations in a legend. So first, you're all familiar with the legend component, which I previously used for doors. So let's just find a standard door and show it in a plan view with the wall around it. So this is something, and I can go all the way to the line because I know this is the line I wanted to have in between. And you can use the host length to go the whole width. It's not necessary. Just you want to make sure it's wider than the actual door. So I have it at 6 feet here. Whatever you do, just make sure you're consistent. So let's say I'm showing it slightly bigger. Now another thing I could do is I could use a filled region. So for example, if I was noting the graphics in a ceiling plan or something like that, I would use the filled region. Okay, so 2x4 ceiling. You can choose to have the border. I generally opt for the invisible lines. So as you're doing the filled region, just make sure it's proportional to whatever you were showing with that previous annotation. And you can always adjust location of the line so it's more centered. Just make sure you use tab if you're doing that. Another way to create an annotation in the legend is to actually use the symbol, which will allow you to select any kind of tag and place the tag. So for example, if I want to have the room tag with room number, so this would typically be a tag, but if you use symbol while you're setting up the legend, it will allow you to place that. And you could even use a compound option. So in this case, I'm going to use my legend component. And I want the host to be the same length, so that's why I'm copying it. And then I'm going to use one of my wall types. Which I'm going to combine with a symbol. For the wall tag. Now I cannot add a leader, so I want to give this a little bit of space. So I'm going to use a third option, a detail line. And have a thin line for my leader line. And then use wide line for my thickened end. So in this particular case, I'm using a symbol, a legend component, and some lines. For text, just make sure you're consistent with the text. Size, so 330 seconds is pretty standard. Line it up with your annotation and with the vertical line which you established. Then you can copy it and modify it. Keep in mind, as I change the scale, some of the things are going to stay the same and some of the things are going to change. So if I change the scale to 1/4 inch, like I would have on elevations, you can see that any legend components are going to scale up. They're going to be much larger, but the text is proportionally going to look smaller. Symbols and tags are always the same size, so if you go to a larger scale, like a 1/4 inch, they will become smaller. And then the lines, the detail lines, are going to remain the same size. And the scale, so the border of your hatch is going to remain the same, but the scale of the hatch within it is going to change. So again, keep in mind that legends are actually scaled, and that scale is going to affect how much and which size you can fit into the legend. And now our last bit would be to place that legend onto the sheet. So I'm going to fit it as close as possible to the box that I annotated for it. There's a little bit of overlap, and then I want to make sure that I have my title only. And then finally, all of the legends want to have title and sheet that's just legend, but you want to keep the different names so you can tell them apart in the browser. So my final step is going to be moving the title into the 1/2 inch border along the top, and that is how you set up your legend. Now that we placed the legend, next step is going to be setting up the keynotes. And for that, first we need to create a keynote symbol. Now there are a few different ways of doing keynotes in Revit. You probably noticed in the Annotate tab the keynote function. Now the built-in keynoting function is pretty complicated, and I generally don't recommend using it. You can obviously go through the tutorial and learn how to use that particular keynote command. The other option is obviously just putting a symbol, just drawing some lines on the sheet, and then correspondingly drawing the same type of a symbol and explanation with notes on the title block. Now, I don't recommend that either. There is the third option. It's partially automated, but partially you need to set it up. That allows you quite a bit of flexibility, and once you have it set up, you can repeat it over and over again and use it in all of your projects. So let's get right into it. So first thing you want to do is create a new generic annotation, same as we did with that template in a legend. So you're going to go to new annotation symbol and make sure to pick generic annotation. So right here, and then we're going to click open. And I already have a drawn keynote the way I would like you to use it. So as you remember, you have the center point of placement, and around that center point I would like you to use the oval shape for the keynote. Now they come in all different kinds of shapes. I do prefer oval for a variety of reasons, and while you're in my class I would like you to use this shape. In the future you might work with circles, squares, triangles, and different other shapes. Part of the reason why I like oval, it allows easily for a double-digit number, and it's really unlikely that you'll have something in this shape on your sheet. So it will not look like a column, as a circle or a square might, and it's unlikely to be mistaken for something else. But again, different schools of thought on that. It's definitely not a universal thing to have it an oval shape. And the oval, you would just use the generic annotation detail line to create it, so with the line, and the dimensions, the 1/4 inch across, centered, and then we have 5 at 30 seconds, and this can vary a little bit, but it fits the 330 seconds font fairly easily, the label, and make sure you always have the keep readable, and you count for 2 digits here. So let's talk a little bit about the label itself. So the label has the keynote number parameter, which is created specifically for this family. So if I go to edit, I can show you all of the settings. So keynote number, it's just a family parameter, and it should be an instance because it's going to be specific to each one of the keynotes, and you can sort it with other or text, whichever one you prefer. So I'm not going to modify that. So that's what the label is. In addition to that, there should be 2 other parameters that you enter into this family. So we have the keynote text and keynote filter. And I'm going to go into the family settings. So we looked at the keynote number, and so these are the only parameters, and the keynote text is also going to be an instance family parameter that's just text, and this one is grouped under text. Again, make sure it's instance, and make sure it's a text parameter and grouped. Grouping can be other or the text, so you can enter any kind of text here. And then finally filter. This is going to allow us to have multiple sets of keynote blocks and multiple sheets and filter them by sheet. And this again is just an instance text parameter. So fairly straightforward here. Family, instance, and these are all text. So what you will do when you're creating your family, you would create a new parameter and set up all of these. Just again have it preset in the interest of time, since I do use this keynote symbol quite a bit. Okay, and now that we have it drawn, make sure also your circle is noted as visible. That should go on by default, but just double check so you don't lose it once it goes into the family. Okay, and then we'll load it into the project. And here we go. Symbols, the generic annotations, can be placed into any view, so no matter which view you're in, it will offer you to be placed. They're also view specific, so instead of placing it in this working view, I am going to go onto my sheet and place it directly onto the project, onto the sheet view. So activating the view and using the symbol. And keynotes are used for anything that's not accounted some other way. So in the final set, you won't have too terribly many keynotes because things like doors, windows will be already taken care of with a schedule, with tags, walls will be taken care of with a tag. But anything special that needs to be explained that cannot be shown visually somewhere else or scheduled should get a keynote. So first things first, you usually have an arrow for the keynote. So if we add the leader, the arrow needs to be set up, and you only need to set it up in a family once by editing type, and then I suggest using 15-degree filled arrow, just like this. So now we could potentially point it to something. Now you can click on it to enter the number. Keynotes are sheet specific. You start with 1 and keep numbering up, and don't skip numbers, and you can see that here the parameter is filled in. You can enter then, and what I like about it, you don't have to track your notes, you can enter the text right here. And I'm just going to say test note 1, and then filter, because you're going to have note blocks that are specific to sheets, so you're going to have keynote 1 on each one of your sheets that has keynotes. We want to filter it, and this is sheet A1.1, so we're going, I always filter it by the sheet number. So it's A1.1. And now let's create a couple of more keynotes. The most important thing, the most common mistake when you copy these is to change the text without changing the number. So I'll do that just on purpose to show you what happens. So that becomes test note 2, but it's still 1. So these two have different text, but same number. Here I'll do what I'm meant to do, and I'll change the number, and then I'll change the text. And now let's deactivate this view. And we're going to create a note block that will then sit right here next to the legend that will show our keynote text. Not very original at this point in time, I have to admit. So going to view, and under schedules, select note block. You can create a tracking note block for any generic annotation. So we're picking keynote symbol here, and I'm going to call it keynotes, and because I'm going to filter it to this sheet, it's going to be a 1.1. So I'm going to add my keynote fields filter, number, text. Just make sure number and text are in this order. Filter can go at the beginning or at the end. And then we're going to filter it by keynote filter. And right now there is only one here, since we only have one in a file. Sorting grouping should be by number, ascending, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and make sure to unclick itemize every instance. So if you have one keynote in multiple times, for example, you're pointing to cladding on a column and you show it 3 or 4 times on the same sheet, you don't have the repetition of that note. It's just note 1, column cladding shows up once. Formatting, so filter should be a hidden field. It's just for the purposes of filtering. Keynote number should have a blank heading, and keynote text should say keynotes, because we will use the heading title to organize the keynotes. And finally, in the appearance, this can be done a few different ways. My preference, no grid lines. We're not going to show title. We're going to use those headers that we just adjusted. And you can use Arial. The header text should be the same size as your legend text. Title is not showing, so it doesn't matter. So if I want 1/4 inch high text, which I don't have an option for here, I will need to create that, because if you remember, my legend text is 1/4 inch high. So for now I'm going to hit OK. And this is what it looks like. So now I need to make a couple of modifications. First, I want to make sure that this is a 1/4 inch font. So under Manage and Additional Settings, I'm going to I'm sorry, not Manage, that's for lines. So under Annotate Text, so here I'm going to duplicate, and I'm going to create 1/4 inch Arial. Always make sure your name and the actual size matches, otherwise you're going to drive yourself crazy picking a size and then realizing you messed up and it's actually something else. Okay, so now in the appearance, I can select that text. So my header is going to be 1/4 inch, and why not? I'll set the title to 1/4 inch, even though I'm not using the title. Also under formatting, see how keynote header is centered? So I want that to be left justified, same as my legend. So orientation is horizontal, and alignment should be right center, so it should be left justified for the heading. And if for some reason it still didn't catch, because now you can customize the headings individually the horizontal alignment. Okay, I finally got my horizontal alignment. Now this is the mistake I mentioned with keynote number one. We have number one, but the keynote is blank because remember we have two different notes in number one. So what I'm going to do is under sorting grouping, I'm going to itemize every instance. Every time you get a blank line error, this is what you'll need to do. So I'll note, oh, this keynote one should actually say, so I should either change the number to 2 if the note is correct, which is most often the case, or if the note is incorrect and the number is correct, I should change it to match. So now if I go under sorting grouping again and uncheck the itemize every instance, there my keynotes are going to look correct. And now the final step is going to be, I can just, so this is going to be sorted under schedule, keynotes, and I'm going to place them on the sheet. And the only thing I'll have to do with the keynotes, I don't automatically get that underline, so that is one thing that you will have to do with the detail line. Okay, and now if I want keynotes for the next sheet, what I will do, I can just duplicate the schedule, change the number to the next sheet, change the filter to 1.2. All my keynotes disappear because I haven't done any keynotes on that sheet yet. And now when I place the keynotes with the 1.2 filter on my reflected ceiling plan, this is automatically going to populate. So I would suggest you create these note block schedules for all of your sheets and preset your keynotes, and then have all of the filtering in place. So then when you start keynoting, you can just bring up the symbol, make sure it has the correct filter, and populate your text as you need to create a note. This is why this is preferable over just creating text and on the title block and the notes, because then you have to go back and forth thinking about, okay, this is the text that I want to type, this is the note, and making sure they match. This way you can put the text directly into the keynote while you're in a sheet, while you're in a view working on it, and it automatically populates on your title block. And that is the quick and easy way, somewhat smart, to create keynotes. So final step on the annotations on the sheet is actually the easiest. So we've gone over the title block, we created some lines to align our sheet, we placed the view, we adjusted the title. Obviously the views, placement, and the titles, there might be multiple on the sheets where you have your enlarged floor plans and your elevations. So you should proceed with your mock set and create the sheets. Each sheet should have its views, and even if the views are not completely drawn, set up your elevation, set up your enlarged floor plans using the callout command, and create a legend for each sheet and create a title keynote block. Now what you will have on certain sheets in addition is the sheet notes. Sheet notes generally don't occur, those generalized notes don't occur on the enlarged plans and elevations, but you will have sheet notes on overall plans like partition plan, reflected ceiling plan, and finish plan, conveying any kind of general assumption about those plans. For example, that all of your dimensions might be face of wall to face of wall. And you'll probably also have sheet notes on your schedule sheets, so on the door schedules, and you might have them also on the partition type schedules and even the finish schedule, if they're not already covered on a finish sheet. So not the enlargement elevations, but the other sheets. And there is nothing particularly sophisticated about those. What you do is you just create a drafting view. So drafting views are two-dimensional views, and just make sure you call out the sheet notes based on the sheet they will be going on, or the other way you can also call them depending on the type. So in this case, these are going to be for partition sheet, and they can be full size, just like this. And now one thing you want to do here is, before we just use text to annotate, you want to use your legend template that we created, because it's going to tell you how large the text needs to be. And you can see right now that because this is full size, it's going to be fairly small. So make sure you keep the same 1/2 inch border around any text that you insert, and then simply start with the text. Use a 3/32 Arial or another font that you prefer. Just make sure consistent font, consistent size throughout the file. And then let's do some typing. You want to make sure you space the sheet notes. And nowadays in Revit, it's amazing you can actually tab. We didn't used to be able to do that, and there are all kinds of ways we found workarounds around this. This is a fairly new innovation, believe it or not, being able to tab and inset. So you can have subnotes too. And then go back to your sheet notes. And because you know how large your text can be, how long your lines can be, you can make sure you extend your text box all the way, so if you're adding additional notes and you don't happen to be on a sheet, you know exactly where to place them. And now the only thing we need to do is put the drafting view, so that's going to be under the drafting views, and put the sheet notes on the sheet. You have your border, so you can adjust the location. And then don't forget to change the title to title only, our legend title. And obviously we don't want to call it sheet notes partition, so while we want it to sort that way in a browser, we can override the title on the sheet and just call it sheet notes. And place them right here in alignment. So this is how you mock up, set up your sheet. And once you have the whole set up, this is going to take some time, and you know where everything goes, you're going to go back into your views, annotate them, and add any additional details and anything else that you need to add. But for now, the first step, after you marked out your set by hand, assuming what's going to go on each sheet, go through, set up each sheet with a tile block, with a grid, place all of the relevant views, create any new views you need to create and place them on a sheet, making sure with elevations you're unraveling them on a sheet. And if you have multiple views, you start with plans in the right hand corner, so your large floor plan would be here, then RCP, and then a row of elevations for a sheet, for example, that has your cafe kitchen or your classroom enlargement. So first floor plan, then reflected ceiling plan, and then the row of elevation below it. And just keep your note block either along the bottom or on the right hand side, depending on how your plan is set up. So in this particular case, we need to go along the bottom because it's too wide. If it was more squarish, I'd probably have it vertically here. And if it's smaller or in between, again, you can have two floor plans per sheet or have some other kind of arrangement. The preference is always to have the notes towards the right, and the legend always goes in the right bottom hand corner. So have some fun setting up your sheets.